Laura and Pete sat in the Bali flight's departure lounge, relieved to be done with all the prep. Laura, exhausted from last night's activities, eagerly awaited the vacation ahead. Pete, distracted by a message, reminded Laura to put her phone on airplane mode, but she hadn't brought it. Concerned, Pete showed Laura a threatening message on his phone, addressed to him. Laura reassured him it might be a mistake, but Pete admitted his wife knew about their affair. Despite their panic, they speculated it could be a wrong number or meant for someone else. They decided to call their contacts to check for anything unusual. Laura watched as Pete dialed a number, but there was no answer, so he left a message expressing his longing. Puzzled, Pete looked at Laura and asked if she would call her husband. "I left my phone behind, you can use mine," she offered. As she reached for the phone, they both realized the absurdity of the situation, and Laura began to feel regret for the first time. Their conversation was cut short by the boarding call. Though they stood in line together, they refrained from holding hands in public. Pete scanned the crowd for familiar faces as they made their way to their seats, amusing Laura. Seated, Laura rested against Pete's shoulder, and he asked why she hadn't brought her phone. "It's part of my plan. I'll explain later," she promised. Once airborne, Laura pulled out her laptop and opened a document, revealing her strategy for their future together. She handed the computer to Pete, sharing her bold plan for their relationship's future. "My beloved husband, I adore you and you alone, just as I have for the past 25 years since we first met. Looking ahead, I eagerly anticipate the next 25 years and beyond, as it has always been my deepest desire to share my life with you. Each passing day, my love for you grows stronger, and I joyfully dedicate myself to caring for you and our beautiful children. Apart from occasional visits to friends, I have seldom asked for anything for myself, knowing your love for me and your desire for my happiness and contentment. Now, in the spirit of our mutual love, I want to discuss something important. I've deliberately given you 2 weeks to consider my proposal, as I fear that discussing it face-to-face might lead to misunderstandings. For this reason, I've left my phone behind to ensure uninterrupted contemplation. Understand, I'm not attending any work-related event and no one there knows my whereabouts, so attempting to reach me would be futile. My dearest, you are a remarkable lover and I cherish every moment in your embrace. However, I must admit a longing for closeness with others, a desire that weighs heavily on me. Please, before you react, hear me out. I plan to spend 2 weeks away with a coworker, but I assure you, I've never been unfaithful to you, nor will I ever be without your full consent. Here's my proposal. With your understanding and approval, I wish to explore carnal relations with other men. My desires have evolved to a point where the love and skill you offer may not suffice. Rest assured, it will never involve anyone you know, and I vow to maintain utmost discretion. If even a hint of suspicion arises among our acquaintances, I'll cease immediately. Know that you'll always have me whenever you desire, and our closeness will remain unchanged. This arrangement won't alter my feelings for you or our lovemaking in any way. Please take these 2 weeks to ponder it carefully. If you truly love me as you profess, consider this a chance to demonstrate it. I trust your love for me, and that trust will comfort me during my absence. Please, my dear, reflect on this over the next 2 weeks. If your answer is no, I'll respect your decision and welcome further discussion. I'll try not to take offense at any harsh words or doubts you express. If your answer is yes, a simple affirmation will suffice, and we needn't dwell on the matter further, though I'm open to discussion if you wish. With all my love, Laura." Pete finished reading and exclaimed, "Wow! Pretty impressive, right? I borrowed some lines from an erotic story I found online," Laura admitted. "Why call it an investment in our future? Asking for permission to be with someone else is a big deal," Laura thought to herself. "I can handle 2 weeks with you, but finding your replacement is another story," Pete remarked. "You seem confident he'll agree," Laura noted. "I made it seem like he has a choice, but if he says no, we'll continue sneaking around," Pete explained. "Thoughts?" Pete asked. "Logical and decisive," Laura replied. "But his decision won't be based on logic. I hope he's not too proud," Laura worried. "He won't be offended. I spent days perfecting it," Pete assured. "Regardless, men are sensitive about their performance," Laura cautioned. "Either he gives in or gets defensive," Pete predicted. "I disagree. He'll appreciate my honesty and think it over carefully," Laura insisted. "If I ask first, it's risk-free." Pete observed his prospective lover with skepticism, realizing her deceitfulness. Despite his own fib to gain freedom from his wife, Laura's manipulation troubled him. He casually inquired about her previous story, only to learn her husband had kicked her out. likely to divert her doubts. Concerned, Pete changed the subject, hoping she wouldn't act on her letter's proposal. During their innocent vacation, Laura mentioned encountering a disturbing individual at international registration. She described his unsettling gesture of slashing his finger across his throat. Laura casually asked for details, dismissing it as typical odd behavior. However, when Pete described the man's appearance, Laura abruptly turned serious and retrieved her laptop, pulling up a picture of herself with a man in front of a house. With a worried tone, she asked if the man in the photo was him. It resembled him, but she couldn't be certain. Laura scrutinized Peter, wondering if he had a reason to deceive her. She pondered if he feared her husband had caught on, making her unavailable for 2 weeks. It dawned on her that Peter's willingness to cheat made him untrustworthy. "What was the guy wearing?" Laura asked. Pete explained he dropped her off at the domestic terminal and doubted he could have followed her to the international one. Laura remained skeptical, needing further distraction. "Is that your house?" Laura asked, seeking diversion. She described their beach property, boasting about its collapsible design and artistic interior. Each room had a unique theme, earning them awards for the design and clever land usage, including a creek running beneath the house. The conversation shifted to their families, a topic they had avoided. Pete discussed his 2 children, aged 6 and 8. Laura mentioned her 3. Sarah, 23, a recent law school graduate working as a real estate lawyer, and her 2 younger sons, Daniel, 16, and Larry, 13. Laura tried to distract herself, jotting down notes about her family. Uncertain if her husband was monitoring her, Laura couldn't make plans. She focused on safeguarding her home and family, berating herself for not facing reality sooner. She meticulously packed for her supposed business trip, sneaking in items for her Bali getaway. Her husband remained oblivious, and they made love as usual. Laura went to work on Friday, arranging for her husband to pick her up. They spent time with the kids before making love late into the night, fueled by Laura's anticipation and her husband's ignorance. Saturday morning came early, and Laura headed to the airport. She recalled nervously suggesting her husband drop her bags at the check-in line and leave, relieved when he agreed. As she watched him leave, his impatience struck her differently. She compared his behavior to her meticulous planning. No one from her job knew about her trip, and her husband didn't know her colleagues. Pete's text message was a prank, and the man at check-in was just a stranger. Laura tried to calm herself, considering the consequences if her husband discovered her deception about her destination. She realized the seriousness of her actions, especially in light of the letter's contents. During the flight, Laura focused on destroying the letter and convincing herself she was worrying over nothing. Laura, always prepared for any situation, wrote a detailed letter to Sarah, though she couldn't send it until later. She asked Sarah to perform 2 tasks: switch Laura's phone to Pete's number and retrieve a personal letter from under her father's pillow, emphasizing its private nature. Laura trusted Sarah's discretion and closeness to follow her instructions. As an addendum, Laura requested Sarah confirm receipt of the letter and notify her after completing the tasks. Upon arrival in Denpasar, Laura emailed and called her husband from Pete's phone, receiving no response. This unusual silence alarmed her. Before reaching the hotel, Sarah called Pete's phone to confirm completion of the tasks. Laura avoided questions about the situation, but Sarah's news shocked her. Her father had taken the other children to their cabin in the country. Laura, confused, deferred to her daughter's decision without further inquiry. Update. Laura's husband had just cooked a barbecue dinner for his 3 children at the cottage. They begged him to take them camping to catch wallabies for their favorite campfire stew the next day. Sarah sensed her father's distraction, but didn't press him. During a family meeting, she broached the topic. "Is it because of Mom?" she asked. "Yeah, she's been acting strange for months now, emotionally withdrawn," her dad replied. "Yesterday and this morning I found out some odd things." The room grew tense as her father continued. "Your mom told me she's going on a 2-week work course overseas. That's exactly what she told all of you. Yesterday I saw her talking to a man at her office, and something felt off. I recognized him as Peter Auer. This morning I found her passport with a visa stamp for Indonesia, dated 3 weeks ago. Bali, where she was reading a brochure last month, is in Indonesia. It's not just interstate, it's overseas." He paused, contemplating his next words. "I didn't confront her. Accusing someone of cheating without proof, especially someone you love, is serious." Sarah stepped in, reminding her father of their family values: honesty, integrity, and respect. The solemnity in the room deepened as they allowed their father time to process his thoughts. "This morning, Mom asked me to drop her off at the domestic terminal and leave. their father began, his voice heavy with emotion. I agreed, but instead I went to the international terminal. I saw Mom checking in for a flight to Bali with Peter Auer, someone from her work. I was too stunned to confront her. Sarah asked, "Do you think Mom lied to us?" "Yes, Sarah, I believe she did," their father admitted, turning away, visibly pained. Seeing him like this, they all enveloped him in a comforting embrace, willing to do anything to ease his anguish. Sarah stepped up once more, asking her father what his plan was. He admitted uncertainty, emphasizing that infidelity would be the end of their marriage. He sent a warning message to both his wife and the man she was with, delaying a decision until he had time to think. Sarah revealed that her mom had left her phone at home, meaning she hadn't received the message. She offered to contact her, but her father refused, insisting her mother must answer for her actions without coercion. Sarah then shared the phone number her mother had provided, matching it with a number on a business card her father had. This confirmed his story's truthfulness. But there was more. Sarah handed her father the letter her mother had asked her to retrieve, urging him to read it. He hesitated, but Larry insisted, emphasizing that decisions about their family were made collectively. Dave gazed at his youngest son, overwhelmed with pride. In the midst of their family's greatest crisis, he handled it with remarkable maturity, surpassing even his own father. They hugged, and Dave began to read aloud, focusing on the third paragraph. It contained a seemingly reasonable request from a wife to her husband, but one sentence exposed a lie that tainted the entire message. After a lengthy discussion, they concluded that their mother's actions warranted serious consequences, possibly even expulsion from the family. Dave defended his wife, urging his children not to let her actions change their feelings toward her. But Larry disagreed, asserting that her lie had already severed their family ties. As Dave observed his son's resolute demeanor, he realized how much they were alike. Update. Laura surprised Pete at the hotel reception by requesting a separate room on a different floor, booked for 2 days with an option to extend. She instructed Pete to unpack and meet her in the lobby in 2 hours. Despite his confusion, he complied and they met as planned. Upon seeing Laura's attire, Pete felt a surge of desire. Despite their close relationship, they had only shared kisses and gropes. Laura explained the recent events, including a threatening message on Pete's phone and her husband's unusual behavior. Pete comprehended the implications, but felt disconnected from the situation's relevance to him. Laura expressed her certainty about her husband's potential knowledge and the consequences of their affair, emphasizing her reluctance to risk her marriage. She insisted they refrain from sleeping together until she confirmed her husband's ignorance. Peter's disappointment was evident, but Laura anticipated his objections and dismissed them, challenging him to consider the scenario from her husband's perspective. Observing his logical response, she remained frustrated by his apparent lack of understanding of her predicament. "Have you attempted to call your wife again since you arrived?" Peter's attention was grabbed. He scanned the dimly lit hall, searching for any surveillance cameras. "All right, now you understand. Tonight and tomorrow, I'll sleep in my room alone. When my husband returns and can reach me, we'll resolve this. Until then, stay away from my room, unless it's a public area, and avoid physical contact. If my husband calls, don't answer or send him to voicemail. Locate me quickly. Here are the numbers he'll use. Give me a friendly kiss on the cheek, and we'll part ways." Following her instructions, Peter complied, and they both withdrew to their rooms, cautious of surveillance. Had they checked the phone number from Pete's threat, they'd have realized Laura was already significantly impacted, though she remained unaware. Update. Days had passed, and their much-anticipated trip hadn't unfolded as planned. They dined in the hotel restaurant, refrained from physical contact, and Laura dragged a reluctant Peter to multiple clothing stores for new outfits. Despite being together every day in case Dave called, Peter held out until Tuesday evening. He booked an extra room, ensured he wasn't followed, and spent the night with a Javanese courtesan. Concerned about her family's silence, Laura spent Wednesday researching divorce online and consulting with her attorney. With unanswered calls from Dave and Sarah, Laura's anxiety grew, feeling increasingly isolated. She pleaded with Sarah to contact her, knowing Dave didn't use email. By Friday, receiving no response, Laura took action to safeguard her future. With her lawyer's assistance, she secured the family finances, transferring ownership of a piece of land to a trust with herself and Sarah as trustees. She then divided the bulk of the finances into separate trusts for their minor children, ensuring dual signatures for access, one being the child and the other their appointed legal guardian. Assured of control over the finances in case of emergencies, Laura felt a sense of relief and slept better. On Saturday, two revelations rocked her world. Pete, disregarding her instructions, visited her room, revealing his wife's awareness of their situation. Meanwhile, Laura discovered Dave's deceit about his whereabouts, prompting Peter to rush home to address the fallout. Laura promptly finalized the financial changes with her lawyer, escorted Pete to the airport, and moved into his vacated room. The second blow hit much closer to home and proved more devastating. Laura decided to check her younger children's Facebook accounts, finding no recent activity. However, Larry's account revealed a shocking post announcing his parents' divorce. "No!" Laura cried out in an empty room, bewildered by David's actions. Divorce ensued, leading to conversations, arguments, and sometimes humiliation. Despite being the family's main provider, her husband's influence on their children had gone too far. Laura prayed fervently, hoping to discern signs that would halt her and Pete's plans before they materialized. Failing that, Dave would soon receive a private investigator's report, confirming nothing untoward had occurred. With Peter gone, all her efforts seemed in vain. As she calmed down, Laura's rational mind kicked in. With no one to talk to, she employed her intellect to analyze Dave's perspective objectively. She deduced that someone other than Dave, likely Peter's wife, had discovered her Bali trip details and informed him. This revelation led her to consider Sarah's potential involvement if she had disobeyed Laura's instructions regarding the letter. Laura retrieved the letter and scrutinized it carefully. Its contents, a mix of facts and falsehoods, could now be known to Dave if Sarah had shared it. Laura realized that Dave's suspicions about her fidelity would extend to all her assurances, including her compliments about Peter. She understood that her actions had shaken Dave's confidence in their relationship, even though she hadn't betrayed him. Realizing Dave's wounded ego, Laura anticipated potential doubts about her faithfulness. She formulated a plan to counter such assumptions, considering when the surveillance might have begun. If it started upon their hotel check-in, the decision to request a private room would have already been noted. Laura pondered, grappling with numerous uncertainties. The once heartfelt fourth paragraph of the letter now seemed like hollow, deceitful words. She dreaded the possibility that Dave had read it. If he hadn't, she felt she could still salvage the situation with careful manipulation. However, if he had, Laura feared that no amount of deceit would suffice. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her, with her sole hope resting on the private investigator's report proving her innocence in Bali. Reflecting on her actions, Laura regretted her impulsive decision. It took a night of contemplation, fueled by hard drinks, for her to realize her role as the archetypal wife with a secret life. Despite her successful career, she resented her constrained past and sought solace in deceit and infidelity. This newfound self-awareness failed to bring any amusement to her. Laura faced the unsettling prospect of potentially being both a thriving businesswoman and a divorced individual still longing to satisfy her desires. Realizing she couldn't find answers where she was, Laura resolved to return home promptly. She sought to stall any irreversible actions by David, so she drafted a letter to him through Sarah. Keeping it vague, she wasn't sure if Sarah had shared the letter with her father or even read it herself. Laura aimed to navigate the divorce situation cautiously, banking on emerging victorious if things escalated. Being the meticulous planner she was, Laura arranged counseling sessions with local therapists and scheduled an appointment with her chosen counselor online. Afterwards, she prepared for a day tour she had booked earlier, intending to call the airline before departing. Update. Sarah enters her father's house and catches the tail end of a conversation between him and the neighbor. "So, besides informing Peter's wife about your suspicions, what else have you done, Dave?" "Nothing." "Hi, Sarah." "You know John Smith from next door, right? He's a lawyer, too. He's kindly agreed to give me some advice." "Oh, come on, Dave. After all the landscaping tips and assistance you provided me over the years, not to mention all the tools you've lent me, this is the least I can do." "Hi, Sarah." "Hey, John. Are you here to assist Daddy with his divorce?" Well. Who's talking about divorce? All we know for sure so far is that your mother lied to us and is spending 2 weeks in Bali with someone. I, for one, will wait to see what she has to say before making any decisions about divorce." "Please forgive my forgetful father, John. He can be quite naive sometimes. Yesterday, Mom's lawyer called me in to sign a trust agreement that effectively relinquishes Dad's control of some family assets. Then we checked all the bank and investment accounts and discovered that most of it has vanished. She's doing everything possible to absolve you, Dad. Admit it. And now this finally reveals her true colors. Sarah handed her father 2 pages of the printed letter. He glanced over them and then passed them to John. Dear Sarah, would you mind printing out the attached document again and giving it to your father? I'm counting on your discretion not to read it. It pertains to personal matters between him and myself. Dear David, I expect you've already figured out that I misled you about the purpose and destination of my trip this week. When I return, we'll have a discussion about it, and I hope you'll hear me out as you always have. Before you make any decisions, please consider 2 things. First, I love you and only you. This has never changed and never will. Second, since we committed to each other all those years ago, I've been faithful to you. I've never been carnal with anyone else. I understand recent events may have caused you to doubt this, and I'm willing to take any necessary steps to prove my loyalty. I suggest a lie detector test upon my return, maybe even right after I land if it's possible. You can ask any questions you like once we address this issue. I want to apologize for any disrespect you feel I've shown you. Please, please, please don't make any hasty decisions. We both know the consequences of divorce. You'd lose the home you've put so much effort into and half of our retirement savings. Think about the impact on our children. Divorce often divides families, and as you know, mothers usually gain custody. Having Sarah and Danielle on my side is expected, but it would be devastating if it created a rift between them and Larry. I know how much you love the kids, and not being able to see them whenever you want would be unbearable for you. So please hold off on any actions until I've had a chance to explain. Looking forward to seeing you soon. Your devoted wife, Laura. John finished reading the letter. If we didn't know what she was doing behind the scenes, this would be really compelling emotional material. What do you mean, John? Dave, you have to realize, in my line of work, I've seen all sorts of tricks. This one is pretty common. Your wife decides she wants out of the marriage. She finds a replacement, takes him for a test drive during a 2-week vacation. It's what's called an affair on the road. If she decides he's the one, she'll come back, quietly move all the assets out of your reach, and then file for divorce. The really cunning ones poison the relationship between innocent parents and their children first, just like Laura started doing with Sarah. Writing a letter portraying you as a wimp that Sarah was allowed to find is one of the most subtle things I've ever seen. The best way to win in a divorce is to deal your partner a complete blow, limit their access to good advice. That means leaving you penniless and then making your children choose who to stay with. In this case, it's between a mother's welfare in the family home and a broke father living in the slums. But surely there must be another explanation. I can prove it. Contact 3 of the best divorce attorneys in town. The one or ones who refuse to take your case are already representing her. I bet she gave all 3 of them an upfront fee to keep you out of the case. If you go broke and get a better lawyer, this bluff has a better chance of working. What's the bluff? This whole letter is a bluff. Dave, her lawyer must have already advised her that getting custody of kids as old as yours isn't as easy as it used to be, especially since you have a good chance of being considered the primary caregiver. The purpose of this letter is she wants you to stop taking any action while she finalizes preparations for the ambush. Her problem is that you found out about her plan before it was fully worked out. When her plan is finalized, she'll want the divorce completed as soon as possible, certainly before Larry turns 14 and can choose which house he wants to live in. Expect her to push for you both to see a counselor. In this country, the courts will only grant a divorce if you've lived apart for 12 months, or if a counselor deems the marriage irretrievable. She may even choose the counselor and use threats to push you. It's common for women to initiate divorce these days. Dave excused himself to ask John who the best divorce lawyer in the area was. He called, gave his name, and requested an appointment. He was informed they couldn't take his case. Unbeknownst to Dave, the top divorce attorney in town had a full caseload, and his secretary was instructed not to accept any new cases yet. Dave returned to the break room. Okay, John, I trust you. What's my next step? First, give me permission to freeze all finances not already under Laura's control, then limit her access to any remaining shared funds. How do I go about that? Start by canceling all joint credit cards, but I still feel uneasy. She's convincing about still loving me, but it doesn't match the threats in the letter's second half. Dad, are you certain Mom lied? Yes. Sure, Sarah. Do you lie to those you love, Dad? No, I don't. What did you always teach us about successful partnerships? Love, trust, and respect, right? How many of those do you see now? 1, it seems. And how much is Mom demonstrating? None. There you go. Update. When Laura tried to pay a fine for changing her flight, both her credit cards were declined. Rushing to an ATM, it also rejected her. In crisis mode, she knew hotel and meals were prepaid, but her traveler's checks wouldn't cover much. With no friends to borrow from, she hesitated to ask her parents for help, fearing their questions. She emailed her lawyer about the bank accounts, preparing for a week of no spending before her return. Reflecting on her once simple plan now entangled with Dave's ruin, she realized he must have suspected her affair, unaware of her financial moves. Alone in her room, 2 emails deepened her despair. One blamed her for ruining a marriage, while the other, forwarded from her own message, questioned her deceit. Realizing her children weren't spared, Laura wept for their disappointment and loss. She assured Danielle she'd explain upon her return, but her daughter's immediate response cut deep, questioning her choice over spending time with them and their father. Laura wept again. It was a hectic and dull week on a strict budget. With little to do besides lounging on the beach, she brought along a towel. After just an hour, she left for the hotel, realizing returning with a tan would contradict her claims. Frustrated, she sent a lengthy letter home via Sarah, hinting at errors in judgment and feeling unappreciated as a wife and mother. It vaguely mentioned her self-worth, emphasizing her fidelity to Dave. Despite lacking an apology, it urged against hasty decisions until they could talk. Not typical of a confident businesswoman, she sent it and waited. Update. Okay, kids, let's discuss what to do when your mom returns. It's surprising she's staying, so let's assume she'll be back Friday. Sarah, you first. Her recent letter showed disrespect and dishonesty, regardless of past lies. I'm done if she doesn't change. Danielle, your thoughts? She may not understand. Larry? I'll stick with you, Dad. I think your mom went off track after her promotion. If she shows remorse, we'll consider another chance. Agreed? Sarah nodded, seeing stability as key for the younger ones. Dad, despite her last letter, I've seen no remorse. So I have a plan to make her realize the gravity of her actions. Afterward, we'll see how she responds. That's the plan. Update. Laura was surprised by the return letter from Sarah, addressed to Dave and the kids, detailing her expected return late Friday night and plans for a polygraph test. A sense of failure loomed over her. Despite feeling ordered around, she decided to go along with their plan, knowing it was crucial to convince Dave she'd kept her vow. While relieved her lie detector offer was accepted, she pondered potential questions, fearing they might delve into her past behavior. Anticipating questions too much could raise her stress level, risking false positives on the polygraph. Despite considering her husband's potential questions, Laura practiced her responses. She arrived at the airport as scheduled, keeping her arrival time secret. Opting for a cab, she reasoned her family wouldn't be waiting at the wrong terminal. However, her arrival felt far from her expectations. At the polygraph waiting room, she underwent pre-test procedures, feeling embarrassed as the technician examined her recent history. Mrs. Brown, the format of the questions I have is rather unconventional. Instead of a standard list, they follow a flowchart, the technician explained. Yeah, I've encountered that a couple of times. There's an initial question, then, depending on the answer, the next question varies. It slows things down a bit, but it doesn't impact the validity of the tests, I assure you. Are you ready? Ready as ever, Laura replied. The operator went through 8 calibration questions, then paused to open the file again and read question 9. 2 weeks ago, you traveled to Bali with the intention of having extramarital relations with Mr. Peter Ower. Yes, Laura confirmed. The operator noted the polygraph readings before closing the file. Laura braced for the next question, unsure if it would be about her actual encounters with Peter and Bali, or just Peter before Bali. To her surprise, the technician closed the file and began removing the paper from the machine. Thank you, Mrs. Brown. I have an email address to send the report to. You may leave. Laura was beyond stunned. What does that mean? Just one question? Yeah, an unusual one. I've only seen this once before, and that guy was trying to make a point. I think whoever wrote those questions was, too. Your husband? Laura nodded reflexively. What does he mean by that? Because I'm lost. I suppose your husband is indicating that he doesn't care if you actually had an affair in Bali. He simply wants to confirm your intent. He's making it clear that your intention to engage with this man from Peter is sufficient for him. Good luck, Mrs. Brown. There are business cards for a couple of reputable divorce attorneys on the front desk. Laura exited the room in a daze, She had staked her entire defense on convincing her husband of her fidelity, without considering how deeply he might be hurt by her deceit and intentions. Frustrated and angry, Laura made a critical error by rushing home without taking time to think rationally. Believing it had become a battle of wills, she was determined to retaliate against Dave's initial move. As the cab dropped her off in her neighborhood, Dave, Daniel, and Larry exchanged somber looks from their car across the street, grateful for the preparations they had made the night before. They didn't want a confrontation in front of the children, knowing it could damage them. Ensuring their phones were off, they retreated to the room they had arranged for Laura. Update. Laura remained silent until Monday, leaving a glimmer of hope that she had used the time to reflect. However, this hope was dashed when Dave received a letter from Sarah late Monday night. It criticized his tactics of involving the children and mentioned an impending family court hearing for temporary custody arrangements. The letter also scheduled a meeting with a psychologist the following day, as predicted by John. Additionally, it called for a family meeting on Wednesday night. Over the weekend, Laura devised a plan aimed at salvaging the marriage, which Dave appeared to have given up on. This involved seeking counseling, preferably with a female counselor, to better communicate her perspective to Dave. She also planned to hold family sessions to explain her actions to the children and prepared for the court proceedings to ensure she was well-positioned if the situation worsened. Laura was already seated in the counselor's office when Dave arrived promptly on Tuesday. He immediately took a liking to the woman in her 40s, who had a retro 60s style. The chairs were positioned at a distance, allowing for privacy. After introductions, during which Laura was referred to by her name and Dave as Mr. Brown, the counselor invited Laura to speak first. She recounted the history of their marriage and then presented her perspective on the recent events. Laura admitted to straying from her usual fidelity, acknowledging her mistake in lying to her family and meeting another man, though she emphasized there was no physical infidelity. Upon leaving the session, Laura was shocked to discover her credit cards had been canceled. She expressed regret for her actions and expressed a sincere desire to move past the incident and rebuild her marriage with Dave. The counselor then turned to Dave and spoke on behalf of herself and their children. She addressed the children's grievances, highlighting Laura's deception and absence during a significant portion of her annual leave. Dave clarified that he hadn't initiated surveillance on Laura during her trip to Bali, surprising Laura, who had expected otherwise. He explained that it was only after their daughter discovered evidence of Laura's financial maneuvers that he was advised to cancel his credit cards to protect their family's finances. Once again, Laura was taken aback. She hadn't realized her precautions had been uncovered, nor had she considered how they might be perceived. The fact that both her daughters were actively working against her only added to her frustration. Dave's words finally conveyed the extent of his offense at her actions. Before Laura could respond, the counselor turned to Dave. "What do you hope to achieve with these sessions?" "I hope to understand why my wife thought it was acceptable to deceive her family and plan to be unfaithful." At this juncture, David and Laura's marriage still held potential for repair. However, everything changed abruptly. It wasn't due to the husband or wife, but rather the counselor. When she muttered, almost under her breath, "Oh, we have a dinosaur," Dave, who suspected Laura had orchestrated the counseling to expedite their divorce and deliberately selected a counselor to hinder reconciliation, snapped. He stormed out of the room. Laura, with a slim chance of salvaging the situation if she apologized to Dave, instead directed her frustration towards the counselor. By the time she finished venting, Dave was long gone. The counselor apologized and convinced Laura to schedule an individual session for the following week. She then apologized to David for her inappropriate behavior and had an individual session with him as well. This marked the third compulsory session, after which a decision would be made regarding the continuation or termination of their counseling. Update. The family meeting the next day was another disappointment for Laura. She struggled to grasp that once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Despite inviting them for dinner before the meeting, Sarah bluntly reminded her of her poor cooking skills, and they arrived at 7:30 p.m. Laura attempted to hug them, but they remained distant. As she sat down last, she felt isolated, facing 4 accusing stares. Despite trying to rally support from Sarah, she found herself alone. Her speech lacked genuine apology, filled instead with excuses and denial. Laura felt undervalued both as a woman and as the family's primary provider. Attention from her husband became routine, and she longed for the admiration single women took for granted. Feeling increasingly insecure, she yielded to the flattery of a younger man. Throughout the discussion, she struggled to meet Dave's gaze, while Sarah scribbled notes irritably. Eventually, the silence from what she dubbed the opposition bench silenced her too. Sarah voiced her disappointment. "Mom, you've let me down again." "What? How?" "You scored 85% on the cliché test. If you'd added, 'no one gets hurt if they don't find out,' you'd have scored 100%. Laura either blushed from anger or from realizing her omission, but it didn't matter. She understood she wouldn't get sympathy from her children while Dave held sway over them. "David, kitchen, now!" Laura demanded as soon as they were alone. Behind closed doors, she confronted him. "Does it have to be like this? Do I have to break you until you come back begging for forgiveness?" Dave looked at her sadly, realizing she was trapped by her nature. "No, it doesn't. If you just did what you know is right. We don't have to end up here. Drop the biased counselor and let's go to court, David." Update. On Thursday, Dave settled into a rented 3-bedroom house, signaling that the situation wasn't going to resolve soon. He also received notice of a preliminary custody hearing for Danielle and Larry scheduled for the following Tuesday. Upon discovering the family court judge assigned to his case, he consulted John. Luckily, it was the same judge who historically favored custody for fathers. Dave declined John's representation, but requested a weekend meeting to understand legal procedures. He aimed to navigate the system properly, prioritizing his children's well-being. Over the weekend, they worked together to spruce up the rental. Dave sat the kids down to discuss their future plans for the house, fostering a sense of involvement. When Laura's lawyer discovered Dave's intent to represent himself, he realized the potential complications. Administrative matters were addressed in court that day due to delays, with a full session scheduled for the next day. Local media caught wind of the developments, ensuring heightened scrutiny. The following day commenced with Laura's attorney reviewing property ownership and financial details. Dave proceeded to ask questions, noticing Laura's visible nervousness, which the reporters picked up on. He started gently, reminding her of his contributions to the family home. Laura affirmed this, but emphasized her role as the primary earner. Dave then inquired about childcare responsibilities, highlighting his long hours of work. When he brought up her recent trip to Bali, Laura's lawyer objected, citing the irrelevance of infidelity in custody disputes. Dave clarified that he was more concerned about Laura's character as a mother. The objection was overruled, and Dave continued, referencing a letter left by Laura before her trip. Laura's furious expression spoke volumes. Dave pressed on, questioning her lack of apology upon her return. Laura remained silent, her response evident in her expression. "Your Honor, your verdict may appear straightforward. I have been the primary caregiver for my underage children from the start, and it's only fair they remain with me, along with the home I've built where they've spent most of their lives. I've remained faithful to my wife and haven't misled her or our children with any damaging falsehoods. I insist she rectify this." Dave sat, facing away from Laura while she glared at him furiously. The judge, fully alert, swiftly delivered her decision. Essentially, she stated that numerous studies indicated children were typically better off living with their mother post-divorce. Thus, temporary custody and residence in the family home were granted to Laura. Laura smirked triumphantly, but Dave remained composed. This outcome aligned precisely with what he'd anticipated after discussing with John. He rose to speak. "Your Honor, allow me to address the court. I'd like to point out your past rulings in cases like Harper v. Harper, Smith v. Smith, Fulton v. Fulton, and many others. Were custody rights typically granted to the primary caregiver?" With no reply from the judge, Dave cited 3 scientific papers challenging the notion that children always fare better with their mother. "What's your point, Mr. Brown?" "I'm merely questioning, Your Honor. Can a man be favored in your courtroom?" The judge scrutinized Dave, who met her gaze, astonished. She then adjourned the case and moved on to the next. Reporters hurriedly scribbled notes. Dave distributed copies of Laura's letter to them before exiting without a backward glance. Laura's attorney offered congratulations, but she felt no joy. Dave's accusation of her lack of remorse struck a chord. Despite feeling cornered, Laura's competitive streak wouldn't allow her to yield. Blaming Laura for his predicament, Dave resolved to correct perceived injustices. He had 3 targets in mind, all needing re-education. After consulting Sarah for advice, he finalized his plans. Upon returning home, he enlisted the help of a federal official to lodge a complaint against the biased judge. He then persuaded Danielle and Larry to spend at least 2 nights with their mother, equipping them for the next phase of his strategy. The following day, 2 critical newspaper articles about Laura and the judge were circulated. Dave saved them and shared them with a contact for further dissemination. Update. Laura arrived home on Wednesday afternoon to find Daniel and Larry there, but their demeanor indicated their protest. When she asked them to prepare school lunches for the next day, their responses were curt. She ended up giving them money for the canteen as she hadn't stocked suitable ingredients. Rushing to change for her counseling session at 5 p.m., Laura outlined her conditions for reconciling with Dave, consuming half the session. She then disclosed 2 prior inappropriate relationships, downplaying their significance. Expressing confusion over Dave's reaction, Laura was warned by the counselor that reconciliation seemed unlikely due to Dave's focus on her intentions rather than actions. The following day's session with Dave was brief and tense. He presented her with 2 choices: find a new counselor or acknowledge the irretrievability of their marriage. Concerned about potential professional repercussions, the counselor swiftly reported the dissolution of the marriage. She feared further complaints to her professional body could jeopardize her career. Upon Dave's arrival home, he found Danielle and Larry already there, appearing comfortable. A police officer arrived, informing Dave that his children were violating a family court order. Although Dave clarified it wasn't him but his children, the officer warned that forcibly removing them would be considered assault. The children refused to comply when asked to leave with the officer, who left to seek further instructions. Laura then abruptly entered the house. "David, this doesn't have to be our reality. Just let Danielle and Larry come with me. Give me the house and I'll be fair with visitation and property division." "Laura, please respect my space. I won't coerce the children into a situation they're not comfortable with, which goes against their morals." "David, we've known each other for years. You know me. I'm not a bad person." "That's precisely it, Laura. I don't know you anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have done what you did. She wouldn't have shown no remorse. And she certainly wouldn't have issued an ultimatum to our counselor, especially after I learned in counseling yesterday about your attempts with 2 other men before Peter. What did I do to deserve this? And what's your plan now?" Laura felt ashamed realizing the counselor's betrayal. She refrained from directing her anger at Dave, focusing it instead on the counselor. She's not supposed to disclose that. Dave didn't respond to Laura's outburst, but instead she stormed off in anger. Dave took action, removing the tape recorder Daniel had planted in Laura's purse before and after the counseling session. He believed justice would be served, and it was. The counselor was dismissed 3 days later. With 1 problem resolved, 2 remained. Child Services attempted to intervene, but the children adamantly refused to leave, preferring to stay with their father. Laura spent the following week trying to regain her children's favor, but they distanced themselves from her. Dave, seeing no progress, hired John as his divorce attorney and verified Sarah's advice. A week later, Sarah informed Dave that Laura was going on another business trip. Throughout the entire week, Dave took time off work to support the children, while Laura learned the outcome of her scheme. Returning home the following Friday, she was met with a surprising sight. Her once beautiful home had been replaced by a damaged building bought at an insurance auction. Feeling a mix of rage and sadness, she discovered that the land belonged to her, but the house did not. Realizing she had been deceived, she made futile attempts to reclaim her assets, only to find out Sarah had legally acquired them. Laura's last act before losing her composure was to lament her own arrogance and the loss of her family's support. "Do you truly harbor such animosity towards me?" Dave's somber response came swiftly. "We don't harbor animosity. You always knew I'd do whatever it takes to safeguard our family. It's just regrettable that you've placed me in a position where I must shield them from you," signed Dave. Laura packed her belongings and checked into the motel. On her way, she passed by Sarah's neighborhood to see the modules of her old house neatly arranged, awaiting installation. Upon receiving Dave's divorce papers at work on Monday, she spent an hour deciphering the seemingly generous terms. The agreement granted her full ownership of jointly acquired property, with expenses deducted for her actions, including those in Bali. It also accounted for divorce costs and financial fraud ramifications. Laura requested the children be given custody choice for family unity. Laura consulted her financial advisor about revoking the trusts for her children, but was informed it wasn't possible. She attempted to change counselors, but without Dave's consent, it was futile. Dave reminded her he had proposed a new counselor earlier, which she declined. Realizing her options were limited, Laura reluctantly signed the divorce agreement, understanding it was her best outcome. Assuming custody of Danielle and Larry, Laura would inherit assets from their trusts, only losing the value of one land parcel. With paperwork finalized swiftly, the divorce proceeded rapidly. Laura knew their family court judge's bias favored women, often advising male clients to settle. Confident in her scheme's success, Laura relaxed, contemplating Dave's reaction and whether he'd accept her terms or succumb to financial ruin. Update. Laura entered the courtroom with renewed confidence, only to be unsettled by her lawyer's concerns about a woman in the gallery. The judge, announcing her retirement, seemed displeased, setting a tense tone for the proceedings. Arguments ensued over legal fees, with Laura objecting to Dave's demand. Despite her lawyer's efforts, the case took a downward turn, lacking substantial evidence. The judge, seemingly biased, awarded custody to Dave, praising his generosity in property division. Laura, shocked by the verdict, left feeling blindsided. Returning home, she faced the reality of selling her old house in an undesirable neighborhood at a low price, realizing her plans had unraveled. Once a marvel of design thanks to Dave, Laura's old house was now being relocated. Disheartened to find only an agent instead of the new owners, Laura left. Back at her new place, she pondered her meager earnings from the ordeal. Reflecting in her journal, she resolved to handle future urges differently and to offer apologies promptly. Weeks later, she humbly visited the new homeowners with champagne, contemplating lessons learned. In parting, she offered advice, urging self-reliance and respectful treatment of loved ones. As for Australian phrases, she shared translations for clarity, emphasizing the nation's irreverent spirit and skepticism toward authority, often exaggerated by politicians. Apologies for my silence, I'm currently incarcerated. I find solace in tales of past heroes, like the Dutch boy who famously halted a flood by plugging a leaky dam. Inspired, I attempted a similar feat. Now I'm serving time, hoping for release in 6 months. As for political anecdotes, even leaders like Gough Whitlam, known for his wit, face scrutiny. Pressured about his stance on feticide, he famously quipped, "Madam, I am in favor of feticide, and in your case, I would make it retrospective," earning a surprising boost in approval ratings.